This is Gender in Focus. I'm Elle, and each week I sit down with the president of Transfocus Consulting and all-round gender diversity genius, Kai Scott. I get to ask all the questions you've ever wanted to ask about how to make the workplace and the world a better place for trans and non-binary people. Let's get into it.
In today's episode, we're talking about leadership buy-in and what inclusive leadership looks like in support of gender diversity. There's so many different aspects to how leaders can show up for trans and non-binary folks, and I'm really excited to talk that through and unpack that a bit more with you, Elle. Hello, how are you doing today?
I'm doing so well, thank you. How are you doing?
Excellent. Yeah, I'm doing really well as well.
Great. I really wanted to start with what inclusive leadership actually looks like.
Absolutely. So inclusive leadership is it's not a recent thing, but certainly we're talking a lot about it recently. And
Mhm.
there's many different aspects to inclusive leadership where whether it's managers, supervisors, or parts of the executive have greater understanding of inclusion and what that looks like and how to foster that within the culture, within the structures of the organization. And there's many different dimensions to it. I know there's, say, Deloitte and various other organizations have categorized those different aspects, whether it's cross-cultural competency or curiosity or being able to understand the distinct needs of different groups by having a better understanding of what their issues are to be able to respond to them and address them, or be able to leverage other people in order to be able to address the issues. It's just not only being aware, but it's an active lookout for the issues so that it's not on the shoulders of the person in a particular equity group to be able to
Mhm.
bring those up. And that is the same for trans and non-binary folks, where it's not on their shoulders to have to always point out the issues, that you have a leader that essentially has somebody's back and can really bring them through the various challenges and to accompany them in a very supportive way, and to also be able to teach others on the team or in the department to be able to step up to set those expectations that people understand how to show up for trans and non-binary folks or people in other equity groups.
Mhm. Would you be able to go into what that looks like more specifically with gender diversity
Hmm.
at all?
Yeah, that's such an important aspect, and certainly one that we see leaders taking up now that they have a better understanding that trans and non binary folks are a part of the equity landscape. Certainly, there's been a lot of focus, understandably, on women and being able to support them in leadership roles and development and training and whatnot. But
Mhm.
now, trans and non-binary folks are on leaders' radar. So what does that look like on the ground? Certainly, people, at least organizations that come to us that need help and support, are when trans and non-binary folks come out. That's kind of the most obvious one that people pay
Mhm.
attention to, and leaders can, freeze in that moment because they haven't had training or the understanding to know how to support a trans or non-binary person in that coming out process. So we help them with that, and it really is key. One subtle thing, just to illustrate as a tangible example, when somebody comes out, if that leader is not themselves trans, they may go to things like, "Oh, you're so brave," which is like a very positive intention to kind of underscore the bigness of the moment. And so it's not that they're malicious in any way, but that's
Mhm.
not terribly well received by trans
Yeah.
and non-binary folks for whom this is a necessity. And so really being able to prepare and think about how one reacts initially, which sets the tone for the rest of the interaction, by thanking the person for sharing that information, saying that you're there to support them and that you're really excited for them, right? So there's different ways that you can kind of take that positive intention and redirect it away from "you're so brave," right? Again, that's a very
Mhm.
small example of ways that leaders can get prepared. There could be instances where leaders already know that they have a trans or non-binary person on their team and are looking out for things where systems or spaces may not be set up for that trans or non-binary person to fully participate in the work, whether it's a form not having enough first name fields or not enough gender categories to respond in a survey, and to be aware of those and to flag those with human resources or executives of the organization. And so that way you're leading the way and not having to fall on the trans or non-binary person to raise those. But if you don't notice those, it's still really good if a trans or non-binary person raises those topics, to be responsive, to take them seriously, and to thank them for coming forward with that information, and not to like let it sit idle and think, well, I
Mm.
hope somebody else takes care of that, but
Right.
I don't know what to do about it, so I'm not going to do anything. So these are some of the dimensions or aspects. But even if you don't know somebody is trans or non-binary on your team, doesn't mean that there aren't folks. Some people are not out at work, or thinking about coming out. And so even creating an inclusive culture where you talk positively about a trans or non-binary person, or you use annual events to highlight issues and ways that people can show up. All of that can be very positive signaling for folks who are maybe sitting on the sidelines wondering if they're going to share more about themselves. So those are just a few examples and scenarios and that ways that people can be leaders or step up as leaders for trans and non-binary folks.
Mm. You were talking just then about if trans and non-binary people see issues and they want to raise it with their leader. But what about more generally with frontline staff? If they tend to be the ones who are seeing the gaps sort of on an everyday basis, what is the role of frontline workers when it comes to kind of that work within inclusion?
Yeah, that's so important because sometimes leaders are handling so much, and it's understandable that things might, you know, they may not register things, or
Mhm.
like you said, they're not on the front lines seeing the upset clients or customers, trans or non-binary customers, and or they may not register that they have a trans or non-binary person on their team, or may just not know what to do, and so kind of silently walk by. Frontline workers can have closer relationships with coworkers, and so know what the issues are, and
Mhm.
they also are serving customers or clients that they see what's the matter. And so it's really important for frontline staff, if they do see something, to say something to leadership. Oftentimes, leaders are relying on frontline staff to flag these things. Sometimes frontline staff are a bit hesitant because
Mhm.
they might even feel like they're telling leaders what to do, rather than recognizing that they're an integral part of important changes. And it's not like you have to say, why didn't you see this? How could you? We're not accusing leaders of,
Sure.
of missing this. It's more just saying, hey, I noticed this thing. Do we have any plans? Or, just asking questions can often unlock many doors and create that pathway for change that is so necessary. And oftentimes leaders are really thankful for that information because it's just not on their radar. And the more times people raise the issues, the more that they go and get the help that they need to make the long-term change. So you might put in an interim change, right? So if somebody, for example, there's not two first name fields and somebody provides a legal document that has their legal first name, but they tell you that they have another name that they go by on a daily basis, then as a short-term measure, you can put that in the comment section just so you can let other staff know to use that name. and then flag it with leaders. So you've got a quick workaround for it, but
Mhm.
flagging it with leaders then will help them take that long-term step to creating two first name fields as a way to honor the name that hasn't been changed yet legally, which is very common among trans and non-binary folks. So just that kind of flow can really help make real tangible, uh, clear changes. But if frontline workers aren't raising that, unfortunately, leaders don't know to make changes. And then they often assume, incorrectly or correctly, that there's nothing the matter. There are no problems.
Mhm.
And so that's a key part of it. You don't actually need leader effort, that frontline workers can provide that important impetus for change.
I really liked what you just said about not kind of going in with accusations, but more leading with curiosity, kind of
Mhm.
like asking the questions instead. I think that's a really nice way to look at it. And I was going to ask you that hesitation that frontline workers have with bringing things up with their leaders. Do you have any strategies that are
Mm.
like good ways to notify leaders in a way that kind of brings confidence?
Mm. Mhm. I totally appreciate why frontline workers hesitate. Sometimes it depends on the culture of the organization, where if it's very hierarchical, there might not be a flow, a well established flow from
Hmm.
frontline to leader, where it can be quite difficult to raise things or even to know the pathway of where to raise them. So I totally appreciate the hesitation. Um, and if it's a little bit more flat, it's a bit easier to
Hmm.
know kind of who to talk to and where, when, and how and whatnot. But in terms of specific strategies, it's as much as you can to highlight the issue, right? I tend to make it very concrete, where I grab a few screenshots to say, this is what's currently the case, right? We'll go back to the concrete example of one legal first name field, and then say, and this client or customer or whoever came to me and asked for, said they had another name, and then I was put in a position of like not knowing what to do, right? So that you
Hmm.
can kind of plot out the journey that somebody undertook, and to show that the organization not only doesn't support the customer in this case, but
Hmm.
actually also the frontline staff. They are left guessing and figuring something out, kind of freestyling in ways that feel really unsettling. And especially if you have somebody who's really upset, uh,
Hmm.
adding in a bit of emotion they had. They were very agitated. They suggested this, and just kind of fill out that, and even writing it down in a bit of a document can really help give people a view to all the sides of the equation. And that could really illustrate something for leaders. And then just a few questions at the end to and show how you took initiative as a frontline staff to say, and I put it in the comment field for now, but I realize that's not a sustainable solution in the long term, and I want the success of our organization and care for the client, right, or customer.
Hmm.
All of that, as if I were to receive that as a leader, like, give this person a promotion, right? So I don't think it would be poorly received. And if it is, maybe that organization is, the culture there isn't quite the greatest, right? Um,
There were bigger
but
issues.
yeah, exactly. Um, but if you're able to kind of explain all of that in a tangible sort of way that leaders can almost see themselves in your shoes, that I think is really powerful. And that document allows them to talk to other leaders, or maybe even, bring it to somebody outside of the organization, right? Maybe they want to enlist some support, maybe they want to talk to
Mhm.
Transfocus. Because I'll tell you, sometimes we're presented with an issue and I have very little sense of what that it looks like on the ground. And the more detail that I have, so much the better for solving it, right? Because
Mhm.
there's many different solutions, but if you don't have what is actually at play, it really becomes difficult. And I, in essence, have to kind of prompt for all of that information. So if it's already laid out, it becomes really easy or easier to solve. So
Mhm.
that's what I would suggest for frontline staff to undertake. And sure, it might take 15, 20, 30 minutes to put that together, but that puts you on a very good trajectory to solving it. And also, depending on whether the customer or client comes back, you can show that you've done this work too, and that will
Mhm.
actually impress the customer or client, because oftentimes the issues that they raise are ignored
Mhm.
entirely or mostly, and so this type of legwork really shows that the organization cares.
Mhm. How can leaders work with other leaders to kind of to develop this?
Yes. So leaders amongst themselves are so important. I think peer to peer learning is quite transformational. Certainly, leaders to frontline workers, there's a dynamic. And if leaders are aware, they can usher things in that will really
Mhm.
help frontline workers get things done and understand the reasons why and what needs to change and whatnot. But leaders amongst themselves also very important because sometimes certain leaders can get stuck. They may not fully understand gender diversity or they get confused. Uh, they're not quite up to speed, and other
Mhm.
leaders are. And if there's kind of lateral support, peer to peer support, I think that goes so much further than top down approaches. Certainly, executives setting the tone is really important for other leaders to translate onto the ground, but leader to leader can really do things in a very profound way. I certainly have heard of a lot of examples where, just pulling somebody aside to say, hey, I see you're really struggling with a team member that, say, is trans or non binary, and just walking them through. This is not a call out session. This is not, again, shaming or blaming anyone. It's more
Mhm.
just saying, hey, I noticed you're struggling. And, I don't know everything either, but I have a few things that if you want to sit down and practice, or talk through some of what they're concerned about, anxious about, whatnot. Just having a safe place to go where you can unpack those things in a
Mhm.
tangible way. Especially leaders understand the pressures that they're under, all of the different things they're trying to balance, and will appreciate what a leader is going through and also encourage them to go further in their inclusion journey in a supportive way. So I think just spelling out what they've learned and sharing that with somebody else to say, yeah, I was also concerned about this, but then when I learned more or I saw this or I read this article or I listened to this podcast or I took this education session, suddenly this light bulb went off for me and I was able to see on the other side of it, right? Just even plotting that
Mhm.
journey of learning, and especially if you have a similar starting point to where that person is at and being able to kind of showcase how you got to a different place, more
Mhm.
supportive place. I think those types of stories are so profound. Oftentimes people dismiss them and are like, oh, that's too simple. I'm like, no, those are really important, because we all start somewhere, and we land somewhere different, and the journey there is sometimes a mystery, a bit of a black
Mhm.
box. And so the way that you can talk to somebody about that can really help them go further as well
Mhm.
and make, hopefully, the culture in general much better at that organization for gender diversity.
Mhm. Sometimes I get the impression that there is this pressure for leadership to kind of know everything and already have
Mm.
all of the answers
Yeah.
ready. So I guess kind of working with other leaders in that way can really build that and reduce the pressure because you have like a support system.
Yeah, absolutely. So many folks are looking to leaders, not just on gender diversity, but all the equity issues. And I certainly am not dialed on all of them. I'm continuing to make progress and I am committed to doing that. But, we can't expect everybody to know everything. And that's
Mhm.
why we're so important to each other, especially if we share the same level at an organization, to say, hey, I don't know everything on this topic, and maybe you can exchange, right? It's not
Mhm.
to say that this person is only a deficit of knowledge. They could know something way more on disability. And so you could be like, hey, I know about gender diversity a little bit more, it looks like, than you, and you know stuff on disability. Let's get together every month for an hour over lunch and talk about these issues, right? And so that
Mhm.
you don't feel that pressure that you're talking about of having to know everything. And I don't even, I hope it's not the expectation of organizations. Maybe it is, communicated verbally or non-verbally, but that there's a bit more team effort around it, in ways that are sustainable, tangible, like actionable.
Mhm.
And I I think there's a bit of a collective effort, to make that possible, in a way that people feel inspired rather than kind of beleaguered or burdened by this extra effort. Of course,
Mhm.
there's so many other responsibilities that leaders are having to handle, and hopefully, by a bit of a team effort, people can make that possible in their organizations.
Do you have any final thoughts on inclusive leadership before we go?
Yeah, just words of encouragement to leaders. Of course, you're a very important part of the equation. And like I said before, not the only part. Frontline workers, unlocking you all is also important.
Mhm.
It's not just on the leader to know everything, see everything. Um, Others can contribute and do have a role. And that if everybody kind of bands together, so much the easier, whether leader to leader, or frontline to leader, or leader setting expectations for frontline workers. And so thinking about all the different directions and where you as a listener stand, and figuring out what you want to do to either inspire a leader, or if you are yourself a leader, to inspire others in the organization, or even figure out how to lean on other leaders to make your learning that much richer. So it's definitely possible, and together, it sounds very cheesy, but we are stronger. So just encouraging that the kind of banding together, and figuring that out, whether on this topic or any other equity topic.
I'm going to link the quiz for organizations that we have on the website. Could you talk about that a little bit?
For sure. Yeah. So we've developed actually two quizzes, one for organizations that, especially as leaders, it's really good for you to check that out, because that'll kind of spotlight some of the things that may not be on your radar, especially from a structural standpoint. We talked about first names as one example in this episode. There are a handful of other ones that typically trans and non binary folks face. So just by answering a few questions, you'll be able to get some really powerful results, and also some free resources based on some of the answers that you have. If you're a frontline worker, or perhaps not a leader in an organization, we have another quiz that'll give you your allyship type. So I know a lot of people love those kinds of quizzes where you get to know your type. So we've adapted that for this quiz, and this will really give you an insight as to where you are in your journey. Maybe you're just starting out, or you're further along, maybe even a bit frustrated, because you want things to be progressing faster, which I totally understand. No matter your type, there'll be some specific resources that you'll get for free at the end of that quiz, along with your results. So it'd be really interesting to see where you're at. And so invite, whether you're a leader or a frontline worker, to take those respective quizzes, and we'll put them in the show notes so you can check them out.
Sweet. And where can we find you, Kai, on social media?
Oh, yes, all the social medias, plural. So we've got LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I don't do any dances on TikTok, not yet. I don't know if
I'm
that's in the
working on it.
future.
Yeah,
I'm
I'm gonna
frightened.
get you to do that.
TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky. I think there's others, but those that
Mhm.
captures the bulk of them. And then, of course, also we have our newsletter, which we come out it comes out every month. We've got some really great stuff in there, and letting you know of all kinds of free events that we host from time to time, along with resources. So definitely great to get on that and stay on the pulse of change that's happening.
Sweet. See you later.
Okay, bye for now.